What happened to the United Kingdom? Once a global superpower, the birthplace of modern democracy, and a symbol of prosperity, the UK seems to unravel. With its rich history and thriving economy, how did this island nation reach a point where walking the streets of its capital feels dangerous? Where buying a home is out of reach for an entire generation? Is the UK facing a slow and silent collapse? Or are we witnessing something more dramatic, a complete fall from grace? Today we'll explore the before and after of modern Britain and uncover why many believe it has become unlivable. Imagine this, it's the early 2000s. The UK boasts a strong economy, a thriving financial sector, and a desirable quality of life. Fast forward to today, and what do we see? A cost of living crisis gripping millions. Inflation is at record highs, wages have stagnated, and essentials like food, energy, and transportation have become luxuries. The average UK household now spends 14% of its income on energy bills alone. And the housing market? A disaster. Home prices have soared by 60% in the last decade, making a dream of owning a house unattainable for most. But how did we get here? Brexit, a turning point. The promise was prosperity and sovereignty. The reality, a labor shortage, broken supply chains, and a diminished global trade position. The result? An economy that's failing its people. What happens when one of the world's largest economies begins to collapse under its weight? The United Kingdom, once the financial heart of the world, is now sinking into a state of poverty that echoes the darkest days of its past. The cost of Britain's political decisions, like heavy direct investments in Ukraine and the impact of sanctions on Russia, are taking a heavy toll on the economy. But it's not just about geopolitics, it's about survival. According to the Trussell Trust, 3 million people in the UK relied on emergency food supplies last year. That's more than double the figure from 5 years ago. And not just food. 1 in 5 households struggle to pay their water bills, and energy bills are among the highest in Europe, over 5 times the European average. As wholesale energy costs continue to climb, the situation only worsens. This winter, 48% of Britons say they'll have to turn down the heat or turn it off completely just to survive financially. Imagine the economy being so bad that nearly half of the population struggles to keep warm, with some people forced to choose between heating their homes or keeping food on the table. The Guardian didn't mince words when it described Britain as haunted by a hidden poverty pandemic. Former Prime Minister Gordon Brown even called the situation obscene, recounting how in parts of his hometown, 70% of children live in poverty. Brown lamented, "Britain is haunted by poverty we thought had been consigned to history." For many, these aren't just statistics, they're life-altering realities. Retailers report that customers are skipping shopping entirely, not for better deals, but because they've run out of money. An economic avalanche is looming, a wave of debt defaults, evictions, and unpaid bills, as wages are too low, benefits too meager, and the cost of living too high for people to absorb the shocks ahead, let alone make it through this winter. Once the United Kingdom was a beacon of prosperity, now it's a place where grinding poverty and squalor are becoming the norm. A country haunted not just by its past, but by the bleak reality of its present. But it's not just the economy that's collapsing. The very fabric of British society seems to be fraying. Public services are in crisis. The National Health Service is buckling under the weight of funding cuts and staffing shortages. Meanwhile, strikes have surged across sectors, from nurses and teachers to railway workers. These are not isolated incidents, they're cries for help. It's not just about services, it's about trust. A government plagued by scandals and infighting has left the public disillusioned. How do you govern a nation when its people no longer trust those in power? And then there's crime. London, once celebrated as a vibrant global city, is now infamous for being one of the most unsafe cities in Europe. Violent crime is on the rise. Knife attacks, gang violence, and theft are so common that luxury wristwatches have practically disappeared from the streets for fear of theft. This isn't the London of postcards and royal pageantry. It's a city where locals feel unsafe in their own neighborhoods. The rise in demonstrations paints an even grimmer picture. Clashes between far-right groups and immigrant Muslim communities have become flashpoints for a nation deeply divided. The question is, how did we go from social harmony to this level of tension? Let's discuss immigration. The UK has always been a melting pot of cultures, but tensions have escalated in recent years. The number of people crossing the English Channel in small boats has surged, overwhelming resources and fueling political debates. Meanwhile, housing shortages and stretched public services have exacerbated local resentment, leaving migrants and citizens frustrated. The result? A society more divided than ever. Perhaps the most alarming change is the erosion of justice and free expression. In today's UK, people can face prison time for what they post online. Laws intended to curb hate speech are now criticized for stifling free speech, and the justice system is struggling. Massive backlogs in courts mean trial delays and a growing sense of lawlessness. It's not just the courts that are backlogged. The prisons are nearly full, and sentences are only getting longer. How can a society function when justice is delayed or denied altogether? To understand the fall of the UK, we need to remember what it once was. This was a nation that led the world in innovation, culture, and influence. Today, it's a country struggling to find its place. But is it too late? Can Britain turn things around? The fall of the UK isn't just a British problem. It's a warning for other nations. When the gap between the wealthy and the working class grows too wide, trust in government collapses. When a nation stops investing in its people, this is what happens. The UK has risen from challenges before. Will it do so again? What happens when a country's economy is no longer built to serve its people? When businesses lose customers, not to competition, but to poverty, it's clear that the parasite is killing the host. And that parasite is the banking cartel. The grim reality was laid bare last year when Hugh Pill, the Bank of England's top economist, offered advice that sent shockwaves across the nation. Britons, he said, just need to accept being worse off. The same sentiment was echoed by the bank's governor, Andrew Bailey, who urged workers to do their part in the fight against inflation by not demanding pay rises. Back in 2018, the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty, Professor Philip Alston, warned of a systematic, willful, concerted, and brutal economic war being waged against Britain's poor and vulnerable. Fast forward to 2024, and things have only worsened. One report labeled this year financially the worst year in living memory for British families. Why would a government pursue policies that lead to skyrocketing poverty, hunger, and despair? In a rare moment of clarity, Gordon Brown might have given us a hint when he called for a root and branch review of universal credit, because universal credit is the bait to make citizens dependent on the nanny state. And dependency, that's the foundation of control. Former Prime Minister Tony Blair has been leading the charge to introduce digital IDs in the UK, a system many fear could transform Britain into a surveillance state. Imagine a future where your access to essentials, food, housing, even healthcare, depends on your compliance with government mandates. Vaccination mandates, carbon quotas, confined 15-minute cities, insect protein diets. These once fringe ideas are being normalized. The ruling elite, whose shipwrecks in Ukraine and the Middle East are still fresh, are now pivoting inward. They need these measures in place yesterday. This isn't a march toward greater prosperity or freedom, it's the grim dystopia George Orwell warned us about. A boot stomping on a human face forever. What's happening in the UK is not the failure of democracy, it's the exposure of a feudalistic authoritarian rule by unelected, unaccountable oligarchs. History tells us that regimes like this ossify, dragging their nations into prolonged dark ages of backwardness and stagnation. So the question becomes, can the British people fight back? Can they reclaim their future before the parasite kills the host entirely? The United Kingdom is not a single unified story. It's a patchwork of regions and generations, each facing unique struggles. Scotland has been pushing for independence, arguing that Westminster policies have failed its people. Wales has seen growing resentment over economic neglect. Northern Ireland remains a fragile balancing act due to Brexit's impact on trade and borders. These regional disparities reveal a deeper fracture in the UK's fabric, where one-size-fits-all policies leave millions behind. Generational divides add another layer of complexity. For younger Britons, soaring rents, student loan burdens, and low wages have created a bleak economic outlook. Many millennials and Gen Z feel that home ownership is now a distant dream. Meanwhile, older generations often hold the keys to housing, wealth, and pensions, amplifying intergenerational tensions. Can the UK overcome these divides, or will they define its downfall? What do you think? Is this truly the end of an era for the United Kingdom, or the beginning of a new chapter? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Understanding one nation's fall might just help save another.